What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Walk It Off podcast on Walk It Off Wednesday. This episode is going to look a little bit different because we unfortunately don't have a guest for this week, but we'll be back with a special guest next week. He's actually a Padres prospect, played for Team USA as well. Just a little hint for you guys, so stay tuned for that next week. But in this week's episode, I just want to cover some baseball topics with Christian. Let's lead it off by talking about this. We're experiencing and seeing a lot of minor leaguers making insane jumps straight to the MLB with little to no minor league experience. For example, we have Alejandro Kirk with the Toronto Blue Jays. He never played a game above Class A, and a few nights ago he actually went 4 for 4 with a home run versus the Yankees. And here's a little fun fact for you guys. Him and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. became just the second pair of teammates 21 or younger in the modern era with 3+ base hits and 2+ extra base hits in the same game. And another example of, a fast jump straight to the MLB with little to no minor league experience. This case is no minor league experience. Garrett Crochet, not 100% sure on how to pronounce that last name, but he was actually drafted back in June of this year, so he had no minor league experience. Obviously had some experience at the alternate site for the Chicago White Sox, but right at his MLB debut, he was pumping 101 miles an hour. It's obviously pretty quick. We're seeing a lot of 95, 96, but not a ton of MLB pitchers reaching that 3-digit mark. And this kind of correlates to what Gordon Beckham. Check that episode out. We did that episode with Gordon Beckham a few weeks ago. That was a pretty funny episode as he had his Creed impressions. But check that episode out if you haven't already. We were kind of talking to him about his fast jump straight to the MLB. He was actually drafted in 2009 and made his MLB debut very quickly, making his MLB debut in actually 2010. So I was kind of wondering if both Garrett and Alejandro were kind of feeling this way and kind of feeling, overrushed to, perform well and meet expectations so quickly with very little to no minor league experience with these two guys. And Christian, I'm kind of wondering why this is happening so much here in the 2020 season. Really more than ever, we're starting to see it a lot more. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, like you said, it does seem like it's happening quite a bit more. And I don't know why it's happening, but it reminds me of probably 5 or 6 years ago. I want to say it was Brandon Finnegan with the Royals. They brought him up. They drafted him. I guess that would have been 2014. What year were they in the World Series? You remember? I want to say it was 2014. Anyway, they drafted him that year, called him up to the big leagues, and it may have been for the first time in the World Series. I don't remember. He may have pitched a little in the playoffs too. But anyway, he ended up pitching in the World Series the year he was drafted. And so he did fine from what I remember in the World Series. But, like Beckham was talking about, having a successful big league career isn't defined by like, oh, you get called up
right,
and all of a sudden you've got it all figured out. It's not how it works. Like he was saying, you have to learn, how to go through the rigors of a long season and how to handle, slumps, whether it's hitting or pitching, it doesn't really matter. How to handle those things, all under the stage or on the stage of the big leagues, and having all this additional pressure on you. Whereas if, you're in some small town in the minor leagues somewhere, like it's a little easier to go through, some rough patches. But, I think it's great that it's obviously an awesome experience for them to be able to come up and do that and go 4 for 4 against the Yankees and pump 101 in your debut. How that translates to their overall career remains to be seen. There are a lot of cases where guys get called up, they do well, you never hear from them again. Not saying that's what's going to happen, but I don't know why it's happening more. It does definitely seem like it is, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they handle it. And also, will they break with the team next year? We'll see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And kind of relating back to what you said about, some people thinking once a player, gets called up and makes their MLB debut, they possibly think they have it all figured out. When I talked to you about this, I don't know if it was in a previous episode or when we weren't recording, but we talked about this, and you personally thought it was harder to stay in the MLB rather than getting to the
100%.
MLB. So that's a big thing to look out for is, some players, get ahead of themselves possibly, or, get a big head and think they're all this and all of that when, they don't realize that without that minor league experience, like these two guys, they didn't know how the process looked. Of getting to the MLB. Garrett Crochet, he didn't experience that minor league, drive and mental toughness. So he thinks it was just all sunshine and rainbows to get to the MLB. But in reality, it's harder to stay up there, and he's possibly going to see some minor league time in the future if he doesn't stay consistent. I think he performed pretty well in his MLB debut. I'm not sure if that was his only game or not, but obviously he was pumping 101 and had a few strikeouts here and there. So if he stays consistent, he obviously won't have to go through that whole experience throughout his career. But
he might though, because now with the team, and the teams do this, they will manipulate service time.
Yeah.
For their own selfish reasons. And, so he could be doing just fine.
Right.
And they could be, sending him up and down. So, I just don't know how he can, I think it's like you said, very difficult, to stay in the big leagues. And if you're not even being, moved up and down based on your performance, that's a whole nother challenge, because then it's like, well, I was I was pitching well. Why are you sending me down? Like, if you haven't, at least been around a couple years to see how often that happens and how organizations choose to run, the players in and out of the big leagues. If you haven't seen that, like, you may take it the wrong way. And whereas, someone who's been around and seen quite a bit, like, they understand, okay, this isn't because of how I was performing, it's because they're doing X, Y, Z, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down there and do my thing.
Yeah. And another thing is, like, especially being a pitcher, if he faces an injury, he's going to have to go back down to rehab. And if he doesn't return to his own 101 mile per hour, being able to hit spots then he's not gonna return to the MLB just because of the unfortunate fact that he faced an injury, or like you said, if an unfortunate case of the team just taking advantage of him, or just testing him out and then sending him back down in the future. That's going to be a tough case for him to handle, and especially if he takes it wrong, like you mentioned. But going back to the original question I had for you, and why it's happening so much here in the 2020 season, I personally think it's possibly because we've experienced so many injuries here in the shortened 2020 season, like we've talked about in the previous episodes, whether that's because, they didn't progress properly throughout the second spring training, or they just weren't used to the new format. Whether it's one of those two, or, a different case of things, they're just trying to test out new arms. And obviously with the 60-man roster, and with the extra players at the alternate site, there's so many options for these teams to use. So, they're just testing out different arms, especially in the shortened 2020 season, the 60-game format. So that's possibly a reason too.
Yeah, I still struggle with it, because it's like, well, you have an entire minor league system.
Oh yeah.
That you've had for those guys, at the upper levels, AA and AAA. You've had those guys for a number of years, and as someone who's seen this type of thing happen before, it's interesting, to say the least. And when you're one of those guys who basically gets picked over for, some guy they pulled out of the draft throwing 101, I don't know. It's I don't know why they're choosing to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I wish I had an answer for that, but I don't. Because they have plenty of players to choose from, but
Yeah.
maybe it's the new shiniest toy. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different reasons that they possibly don't release. But speaking of MLB debuts and performing very well in this 2020 season, we had Riley Wade Smith on a few weeks back. I'm not sure which episode it was, but we had him on a few weeks back. He made his MLB debut this season in 16.1 innings pitched. He's throwing for a 1.65 ERA, so that's definitely good to see. I'm seeing a lot of highlights of him, on the Diamondbacks social media platform. So that's definitely good to see, especially, seeing someone that has come on our podcast succeed in his career. So that's a good thing to see. But without further ado, let's just kind of transition into the fan question for this week from Derek on Instagram. He asks, what our kind of late predictions are, who he thinks possibly going to win the AL and NL MVP for this shortened 2020 MLB season. Christian, I'll kick it off with you for the NL.
NL, I'm a big Freddie Freeman fan. That team had to deal with a lot of injuries to their rotation and stuff, and they just, each guy one after the other, guys that they brought in through trades and whatnot, everyone stepped up. But at the head of that whole group is obviously Freddie Freeman, and he just produces every year, and
Right.
so he's obviously the leader of that team. So that's my pick. We don't like to say it, but obviously the team is important. There are a lot of good players that play on not so good teams. But Freddie Freeman, great numbers, great season. Team's doing well, so that's my pick.
Yeah, and I'll transition into my pick for the National League MVP for this 2020 MLB season. A lot of people are going to disagree with me here because he's been in a bit of a slump lately, but we've talked a lot about him on the podcast previously because of what him and his team as a whole have been doing in this 2020 season. And for me, it's the most exciting player in this 2020 season overall in both the AL and NL. It's Fernando Tatis Jr. for me. He's coming off of a very hurtful injury to his career. He came back mentally and physically strong, came back better than he was last year. Both defensively and offensively. He's hitting sub 300 as of now, but that's just because of the slump he's been in the past few weeks. But for me, it's bigger than just the numbers that you put up as a player. It's bigger than the plays that you make in the field and how you produce on the offensive side of things. Obviously, that's a huge piece when you're looking into like how good of a player he is and MVP votings as well. But a big thing for me is team chemistry and picking up your players and energizing your players on the bench and off the field as well. And Fernando Tatis does that. He hyped up the whole MLB and he made the MLB more entertaining. He was that LeBron James of baseball. You can kind of relate him to that. Or Zion Williamson. You looked at Zion to be that guy in the NBA that made it so entertaining this season. Obviously, it was weirder because of COVID, but Tatis was that guy of this season, and coming off of a season-ending injury last year, he handled it very well, especially with all the talks about whether he'll bounce back strong or not, whether he'll fold and have a terrible career throughout the rest of his career, however long that lasts. But he's handled it well. So Christian, I'm gonna kick it back to you for your AL MVP thoughts.
AL, I'm gonna go with a pitcher. Give the pitcher some love. Shane Bieber.
Yep.
I mean, that guy is on fire, and he has been the whole season.
Yeah.
Punching out like two guys per inning. I mean, what more can you say about him? His stuff's nasty. He's obviously been one of the leaders on that team as well. So that's my pick for the AL.
Yeah, and I can agree with you there. I can't say that's my fully that's all. I can't say that's all of me going into Shane Bieber for AL MVP, but he has had 10 plus strikeouts. I believe it was 7 or 8 of his last starts. He's had 10 plus strikeouts, so that's obviously showing that he's, missing the barrel on hitters in the MLB. So he's definitely performing well in this season, like previous seasons as well. And he's definitely, met the expectations playing for the Indians and, performing to that level. But my AL MVP thoughts are Mike Trout. Once again,
Shocker.
It's the usual, but what he puts up both on the defensive and offensive side of things is just insane. We haven't seen a player like that in center field, at least in my lifetime that I can remember. So for me on the AL side of things, it is Mike Trout.
Yeah, it's hard to go wrong by picking him. The guy is, as automatic as they come. And, it's like, it almost gets old.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we know, but besides Mike Trout, if Mike Trout didn't exist, who would win it?
Yeah. Other than Mike Trout. If Mike Trout wasn't in the league, who would you choose?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that wraps up everything for this week's episode of the Walk It Off podcast. I appreciate all of you guys tuning in to this shorter episode on this Wednesday. Christian, you have anything else to add?
That's all I got. Looking forward to next week. Like and subscribe and check out add in your comments and questions below and we'll get back to them.
Yeah, most definitely. And make sure you guys go follow the Walk It Off podcast at walkitoff_podcast on Instagram. Like Christian mentioned, subscribe, and drop your questions for next week's fan question as well to possibly be featured. And I appreciate all of you guys tuning in.